Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I am Sarah Maslowski with Moving to Georgia with KeyPoint Homes Group with Keller Williams here in the North Metro Atlanta area, coming to you live every other week, talking to you all about what's happening in the North Metro Atlanta real estate market. And today we've got a really special guest for you. You've seen him on the channel before. Welcome back, John Burchfield with Capital City Home Loans.
Hey, Sarah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks. So for those of you that are new to the channel, John is one of my great preferred lenders, and I always love getting his great insight into what is going on his side with mortgages and getting all kinds of questions answered. And he helps so many of my great clients and takes great care of them. So he's such a great trusted resource for us. So we're going to be picking your brain tonight.
Awesome. Let's do it. I'm excited.
Yeah. So if you're just joining us on the live stream, please say hello. Tell us where you're watching from. I'd love to say hello to you. And of course, if you have any questions about the real estate market, refinancing, mortgages, like now is the time to answer it or ask it, because we have John here that has all the answers that is going to help us learn and understand everything that we need to know. So, John, what are you seeing in the real estate market right now on your side with mortgages?
Yeah. Um, it's definitely a little bit slower period, slower time of the year, which is pretty normal, pretty cyclical that we'll reach into the holidays and things will slow down just a bit. But there also seems to be this pent up energy about where are interest rates going to go? Do we wait on interest rates to drop a little bit before we pull the trigger and commit? There's a lot of curiosity about purchasing a home, a lot of phone calls, a lot of activity, but actually getting binding contracts and getting a closing date set, that's a little bit slower than we typically see this time of year.
Yeah, I completely understand the frustration or having the question of like where are interest rates going, because it feels like for a year now I have been preaching or echoing what a lot of experts have been saying, which is that at this point in this year, fourth quarter, we were supposed to see a big significant drop in rates.
Right. What
And
happened?
yeah, what happened? And then, finally the Fed started dropping the Fed rate.
Hmm.
And so typically mortgage rates somewhat kind of follow that a tiny bit. And I called you up last week and I was like, what's going on? Why didn't we get that bump down that we were supposed to get?
Yeah, what happened? What happened? Yeah, that is exactly a very frustrating part for the consumer to try to digest and understand because there was so much media attention, especially with it being such an election year that just dominated every news cycle. Um, a big conversation point was where interest rates are, where's the cost of living, and how can we make homes more affordable. That was a huge part of the presidential election, and we expected interest rates to get better, and surely enough, leading into the election 2 months prior, we had the Federal Reserve start to lower rates, and immediately we saw mortgage rates go higher, which was frustrating for everybody. But what we have to be mindful of is that the mortgage rates are really based off of real-time economic data, not necessarily the Fed funds rate. And what happened was is just a few days after the first initial Fed rate cut, some employment numbers came out that showed that the economy was really overheating still, that there was just um, such a low unemployment rate, basically full employment. If you want a job, you could find one, according to the government statistics. Then that is seen as very inflationary, and inflation is really bad for long-term mortgage rates. So we saw mortgage rates tick back up, and that trend has really continued all the way since mid-September.
I was in a mastermind this week and we having a group discussion around mortgage rates, and they put it in, I felt like a really easy way to understand. And they were saying that when the economy is bad, that's when you see mortgage rates retract.
Exactly.
And when the economy is good, that's when, you have rates kind of where they're at right now, sixes, sevens. And overall, historically, that's still really low comparatively, if you look back over the last, 50 years of interest rates. And
Sure.
so, it's kind of be careful what you wish for, right?
Right.
Because if rates get much lower, that means something bad is happening in the economy. And then we're looking
Yeah.
at jobs and
Hmm.
wages and all that kind of thing being affected.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, something breaks in the economy That causes long-term mortgage rates to go down. And right now, nothing's breaking, at least according to the government statistics that are out there. I don't think the American consumer feels that they probably feel like it's broken because
Right.
things are so expensive.
Yeah.
Going to the grocery store, all the day-to-day living things is really a burden on your paycheck. So it feels like it's broken, but it's really not. If you go to a store, it's still packed, right? The American consumer is still out there spending a ton of money, driving the economy. And that's as long as that continues, we probably won't see a significant reduction in interest rates, at least in the near term.
I went to Hobby Lobby 2 weekends ago on a Saturday,
Yeah.
and the line was, like, halfway back in the store for all the registers,
Wow.
and I, like, stopped in my tracks, and I was like, "What is going on?" Obviously, there's a lot of people buying, Christmas decor and that sort of thing, but
Hmm.
you would have thought that it was Black Friday in there,
Hmm.
and, it really shocked me at how many people were there. We recently went out to eat at a restaurant and just noticed that it felt like much busier than normal,
Hmm.
and that was, kinda surprising, and I don't know if people feel a little bit better after the election and now they're going out and spending a little bit more money, or, if I'm just now noticing it because I'm hyper aware of it.
No, I think there's truth to that. I think just having conversations with potential buyers every day, there is a renewed sense of optimism. I think just, elections tend to be very negative, regardless of where your politics are. It just has that negative undertones to the whole process. And as soon as that's gone, there seems to be a sense of a positivity around people's decision making and what they might choose to do with their paychecks moving forward. And they're they're definitely spending money. And again, that's inflationary and might not be the best things for interest rates, again, at least in the short term.
Yeah. Well, if you're just now joining us on the live stream, please say hello. Let me know where you're watching from. We've got Victor, who is watching from California. Victor recently just closed on a wonderful home here in Georgia, making the move after retirement.
Awesome.
So he took really great advantage of the market that we're currently in right now, which is we are seeing houses sit on the market longer.
Hmm.
And so sellers are very anxious right now, and we're seeing a lot of price drops across the board. And what I've seen on my side working with clients over the past 2 months is that we've been able to get some really good deals.
Yeah, I've seen that as well, including concessions from the seller, whether they're paying closing cost or a lot of times buying the interest rate down to make the payment more comfortable for the buyer. Getting those concessions from the sellers can that's a huge advantage to helping put the deal together in a way that makes it fit within the buyer's budget.
So let's
And
talk
that's
more
very
about
encouraging to
that
see. Yeah.
because I meet with some clients and recently I had a conversation with some clients. They were like, we want the best deal possible. We're seeing all these price drops. And, we see that a house that was listed for 350 ended up closing for 310.
Hmm.
And my conversation with them was more so like, well, what is your budget and what do you want your monthly payment to be? And
Sure.
talk a little bit more about why it could be beneficial for someone to buy down an interest rate versus maybe negotiating a better price on the house.
Yeah. But again, it all comes down to where their specific needs are from a budgetary standpoint. If we do a $350,000 home at the current market interest rate versus doing a $340,000 home, I'm sorry, I did it backwards. $350,000 home, and we buy the interest rate down below the market with say $10,000 worth of incentives from the seller, we're going to end up with a much better payment, and that buyer is going to pay a lot less over time than if they would have bought that same home for 340,000, but just taken the going rate without buying it down. So that's just a strategy that we can use to manipulate the details of the financing package to best benefit the buyer and put it within that comfort zone for their monthly budget. I'll also say, and this may be a question for you, but do you see that sometimes sellers just have a number in their mind that they are not going to sell the house for less than, but they might give concessions? Like, can it be used as a negotiating tactic to get more money from sellers versus lowering the sales price? Do you see that?
if anything, I see the opposite side talking with sellers where they say, I'm not going to help someone with their closing costs
Oh,
because
okay.
I didn't get help from the seller whenever I purchased the house. I had
I
to use
gotcha.
my own money. I'm not helping the buyer buy my house.
Okay.
And the conversation I have to have more frequently on the back end is that, like, at the end of the day, you just care about what your net number is to you as a
Yeah.
seller. So it
Right.
doesn't matter how we get there, so long as you are comfortable with the net number.
Sure.
And typically I have that conversation more frequently. Now, what I am seeing a little bit more so to that is with the updated changes to real estate forms and buyer brokerage and realtor compensation.
Hmm.
If you have an agreement signed with your agent, just using hypotheticals here, and let's say that their agreement with you is that they're getting paid 3%, but
Hmm.
the seller is only offering 2.5%, um, that 0.5% gap has to be made up somewhere.
Sure.
And a great agent's going to try to get the seller to make up that 0.5%.
Hmm.
We have various different ways of doing that. One option is on a broker compensation form where you just submit to the as part of the offer of like, no, you're going to
Hmm.
pay 3%.
Right.
But I find that creates a lot more friction. And if you take that 0.5% and put it as closing cost instead of on that broker compensation, it's much more palatable for the seller because they just see it as a normal part of selling. And it's basically just putting the money on a different spot on the
It
contract.
is. Yeah. That's interesting.
But they're not saying, well, why am I having to cover your agent fees?
Right.
They just see it as a part of selling the house. So I
Yep.
see that come up a little bit
Yeah.
more.
That's awesome. And yeah, to your point, just moving it from one line to another, it still helps the buyer
Yeah.
that you're
Yeah.
representing. Yeah.
So with this strategy, I think one thing that's so important for buyers to know is that it's so important to meet with the lender early to talk about what your goals are for your monthly payment and what you feel comfortable with, because you could be missing out on houses that you have the ability to negotiate a lot of seller
Hmm.
pay concessions. And that might be at a price point that's a little bit higher than what you on paper you're comfortable with. But if you're able to use some money, buy it down. And it's also important to do that ahead of time because once you submit that offer and get something under contract, for the most part, that is the deal. And
Right.
so if you have a strategy ahead of time of saying, hey, we're going to not reduce the price, but we're going to still have the same net to the seller, but we're going to take that chunk of change and use it to buy down the rate so that you have a much lower monthly payment.
Yeah. Very well said. Buying a house is like playing a football game. You're not gonna kick the ball off and not have a game plan that you intend to execute. And you don't make that game plan as you're walking onto the field. You make that game plan the whole week long as you prepare for that game. And that's what we need to do with buying a house. The more time we have available to find out exactly what that buyer's goals and needs are, develop that game plan, communicate it clearly to all the parties so that we can execute it, then the more success we're going to have in getting the right house for the right budget.
Yeah. One of the questions that I frequently get asked, or that I talk about with clients, especially right now in today's market, is that the chances are that you're likely going to have an opportunity at some point in the nearest future to refinance your loan.
Right.
And some people think that either you have to wait a certain amount of time to do that, or they're surprised at all that that's an option.
Yeah.
And so if you're someone that just bought a house within the past, 12, 24 months, how do
Hmm.
you know
Hmm.
when the right time is to refinance?
That's a good question. Um, there's all kinds of little anecdotal, is that the right word?
Yeah.
Um, Math that says, okay, we should at least reduce your interest rate 1 percentage point. Sometimes they'll be 1.5 percentage point. Everybody's got a kind of an opinion of a baseline. I don't necessarily think it's set in stone because I think everybody's needs might be a little different. In other words, if somebody says, hey, this is just my starter home and I'm going to start a family in the next 3 to 5 years and maybe sell it and buy a bigger home, okay, we're going to need a big drop in interest rates to make it worthwhile for that homeowner to refinance. Probably 1.5 to 2%, right? But if somebody says, no, no, this is my house, I am here, I'm going to pay this mortgage off, they're going to carry me out of here lying down. Okay, then we got a lot more time for even a small drop in interest rate to pay out in savings over time. So that strategy is going to be different for that homeowner. What we make sure that we do is even after we close your loan, we're going to stay in constant contact with you, keep all the homeowners in the know about where interest rates are, and have regular mortgage reviews with them and say, hey, if we were to refinance, we might save $100 a month. Is that worth it? Or should we just hold tight and maybe we can wait another year and save $250 a month? So we'll continue to have those ongoing conversations to find the most appropriate time for them to pull the trigger.
Yeah. One of the great things that I love about working with you, John, is at the end of the day, you're always going to do what's best for the client and the consumer. And you're
Sure.
going to have a conversation around what their goals are. And you're going to give that really honest feedback and advice of saying, like, now's not the right time to do this, even
Yeah.
though it may benefit you financially
Sure.
or, help meet sales quota or numbers.
Yeah.
But if it doesn't make sense for, the client, then that's not going to be your advice.
Yeah, for sure. We've been doing this a long time, coming up on 30 years now. So, one thing we know without a doubt is that if you just treat people the right way, it's going to pay off in the end. And we
Right.
don't want it. One of the coolest things I get to do now is help buyers that I helped buy a house, sometimes help them buy their first house 15 or 20 years ago. And now I'm helping their children buy homes.
How old
And
does that make you feel?
it's such a, yes, it makes me feel old. I am old, getting there, but it also is just so cool to get to
Yeah.
relive that experience and reconnect with the parents. And, sometimes we've already done 2, 3, 4 transactions with them over their life as their kids grew up. And now their kids are getting married and buying their own homes. It's a really neat deal. And that's where, the real, not to get too sappy, but the joy and satisfaction out of getting them to go to work that's where it's at. Right. So
Yeah.
yeah, you always take care of people and then it pays out.
Yeah. Um, Are you seeing any benefit or anyone asking about doing like adjustable rate mortgages? Is that a topic right now?
It is a topic. There's not any value in it right now in the current climate. Um, if you're a geek like me and watch those financial news channels, you'll hear them talk about an inverted or flat yield curve. What they're talking about there is when they look at the different type of treasuries that the U.S. issues. The Secretary of Treasury sells debt in order to fund the U.S. government because certainly we don't take enough in for what we pay out. And so there's 2-year treasuries, there's 5 years, 10 years, and 30 years. And if you look at what each one of those instruments yield, if you were to go buy one, they're basically all the same. There's not an adjustment between the two. So I can loan my money to the government for 2 years and get the same return on investment as if I loaned it to them for 30 years. Flat yield curve. In fact, just a year ago, I earned more at a 2-year clip than I did a 10 or 30, an inverted yield curve. Well, that's how adjustable rate mortgages move, right? If it's a short-term loan, it's over here on the yield curve. If it's a long-term mortgage, it's over here. So we're looking for something to be more normalized, where if I invest money for 2 years, I'm going to earn less than I invested for 30 years. That would make adjustable rate mortgages more attractive. And we'll
Right.
get there.
Yeah.
We'll get there. It's just a weird little time that we're in.
Yeah. Gosh, I had a great question.
I talk too much.
And it was something that I wanted to know. Okay. It'll come back to me.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I was studying mortgage rates over the past 2 years.
Okay.
And this was kind of spurred. I was talking to a colleague of mine, talking about people who say that they're going to wait for the market to come down.
Mm,
And I don't know if you feel this way, but sometimes me working in real estate, it feels like time is fast but slow. And you kind of look up and you're like, well, how long have we been at the interest rate levels that we're currently at?
right.
And so going back and looking, like for the past 2 years, we've been in the 6s and 7s.
That's right.
And so I was going and comparing if you wanted to buy a house like in Swanee or Cumming in 2022, in October of 2022, versus what that price of the house would cost you in today's average price point in those two markets, the interest rate's relatively the same.
Yep.
Just a tiny bit of a difference, but yet the price of the house is $100,000 more.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
and so it just kind of, pains me whenever people say that they're going to wait, and it's like, wait for what? Because I think more people are starting to realize this, including myself, is that this is our new normal. And
It could be.
yeah,
And if it's not, and interest rates do get lower, there are so many people that are doing exactly that. They're waiting on interest rates to be lower so that they feel more comfortable with the purchase process, that those are going to be buyers that you're competing against the same home. So we could be talking about, where we've already seen a 5 to 15% rate of appreciation, depending on your market over the past few years. Um, that could be double or triple that if interest rates were to get into the fives, because you're adding so many different buyers to the marketplace and you're not significantly adding homes to choose from. You still have a lack of supply and inventory. So I think that's the waiting game is not going to serve buyers well. They're going to end up paying so much more for the home that they're not going to save any real cents in dollars. Meanwhile, they could have already been in the house at a lower sales price and simply refinanced the mortgage like we talked about.
yeah. So I'm going to pull up a couple of stats that are recent that kind of talk to some of the points that we're talking about. If you're tuning in and watching us, we've got John Burchfield of Capital City Home Loans, mortgage expert extraordinaire. So if you have any questions about the market or buying a house, what it's like on the lending side, go ahead and drop those in the comments and we'll make sure that we get those answered. This is a graphic from the National Association of Realtors just showing that pending home sales month over month are up. This is the latest month ending in September. And I thought it was interesting that the South has the highest or the strongest home sales throughout the entire country.
Yep.
And I think a lot of it has to do with affordability, weather, all those good things.
Weather, affordability, tax-friendly states. You've got Florida, Tennessee, and Texas, all with no income taxes. Georgia and the Carolinas with very low income taxes relative to some of those other regions. So yeah, it's that's pretty crazy. And if you look in the West, I would love to see if you broke Arizona and Nevada out of that, who have very tax-friendly or no income taxes, what that would look like. Because I would imagine that probably represents over half of that growth just in those two states.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so here is what mortgage rates are projected to do in 2025. A little bit hard to see these numbers, and you get different data points there. Overall, they're anticipating that by the fourth quarter of 2025 that we're going to get down into the lower sixes. And this is a little bit different than what we thought, or we thought this was actually going to happen in 2024. And it's almost
Right.
like we're just shifting it to the next year and saying, oh, okay, no, not this year, next year.
Right.
Um, do you see much happening when Trump takes office, or do you feel like if anything is going to come out of that, that it's going to take several months to kind of see what the impact of that might be?
I think it will take several months. With the Republicans controlling all branches of government now, there's their policies, at least initially, are going to be pretty inflationary, with making the Trump tax cuts permanent, maybe lowering taxes from there, tax exempting other certain kinds of income, and the tariffs are going to make goods more expensive, and it's going to put more money in the consumer's pocket. So when those two things happen, it's inflationary and it causes long-term mortgage rates to go up, like we've been talking about. But here's where the hope is. We also know that because the tax policies like that and free trade policies like that tend to create more revenue for the government long term, which brings down the budget deficits. And if we bring down the budget deficits, then the government's not going to be competing with mortgages for the same investment dollars, right? So if that's the case, then mortgages will by their very nature get less expensive, because
Right.
there'll be more people interested in investing in mortgages. So long term, again, like the graph said, late 2025 into 2026, we still expect mortgages to be a good bit lower than they are today.
Yeah. Steven asked a great question. And I got more of this question probably a year and a half ago, but just had another client recently ask this. Are assumable mortgages a thing? How often do you see those? What does that look like?
Yeah, great question. And very hot topic right now. Certainly, FHA and VA loans are always assumable, right? And so that represents nationwide probably about 15 to 20% of the entire marketplace. And certainly buy or homeowners that locked into those low interest rates in 2020, 2021, they can now sell the interest rate with their home, right? The key is, or potentially the stumbling block for a lot of buyers is that that same homeowner is probably sitting on hundreds of thousands of dollars of equity. So if their loan payoff is 200,000, but they're selling the house for 400,000, the new buyer has to have the $200,000 difference, right? So you have to have the difference in sales price and loan balance in cash to be able to potentially assume that loan.
And I know a lot of folks will kind of make the assumption of, oh, well, if I'm assuming a loan at 200,000, the house is 400,000, then I can just go out and get another loan for that other 200,000. Explain why that doesn't work.
Because the current servicer of the loan has to approve the assumption. And they don't want to approve the assumption, right? Here's the dirty little secret. They want that 2.5% interest rate paid off, right?
Yeah.
They're not making any money. They want it paid off. They want their money back. So they're not going to make it super easy to assume that loan, and they certainly don't have to. So they don't have to approve another loan to be in subordinate with theirs, or their loan to be subordinate to another mortgage, because that adds risk to the loan that they already have, right?
Because then the factor comes in that if someone were to default, who's getting that sum of money first, either the original
Exactly.
mortgage holder or the secondary mortgage, and then it becomes an issue there.
Then they have to fight,
Right.
right? Over
Yeah.
who gets what dollar, and they both end up taking less than they're owed, is what happens. But it cuts into the existing lender, the one with the 2.5% rate. They're already not making any money, and now I've got to, if the loan defaults, take less than I would have normally or otherwise. So it's just not going to approve that,
Yeah.
and so got to have the
So,
cash.
so I would say that it can be done. It's a lot more difficult. You have to have a
Sure.
little bit more flexibility in terms of where you want to buy a house, your timing of buying a house, um, and just know that that could be a long process to get through. And um, getting a mortgage servicer to approve someone is not a quick and easy thing, like where you fill out a loan application and then you get like an instant approval. Normally, it's going through several departments, days, headaches,
Mhm.
that sort of thing.
Yeah, weeks, months, potentially. But yeah, here's what I would tell folks. Hey, if you happen to land into a deal where it's an assumable mortgage, awesome. Let's take advantage of it. But don't let that be the deciding factor of whether I'm going to buy a home or not. Let's get you pre-approved. Let's talk about budget. Let's talk about that game plan. Let's get you out there home shopping. If we find a house with an assumable mortgage that works and fits and all that comes together, awesome.
Yeah.
But we got a game plan to execute.
Right.
Finding the right home should be paramount.
Yeah. Victor has a good question. So, planning on selling in 12 to 14 months, are there any subtle signs that I can look for in the next year that might indicate more favorable conditions for sellers? Um, I would say from my perspective, that's mainly going to come down to interest rates and supply. So, um, I think the closer those interest rates start to trickle down, the more demand that we're going to see in the marketplace.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And then, of course, there's just some seasonality to it.
Yeah.
And it just depended on exactly what part of town or what metro area they were located in, uh, may make that a little different. But yeah, primarily it's interest rates. If we can even get just back to the low sixes, high fives, that is going to unleash. It's gonna take what is already like a kind of a smoldering fire of a housing market, and it's going to create, like a bonfire, and be pretty hot and a pretty good time for sellers.
Yeah, Stephen, in response to what we were saying, said, not as simple as social media makes it seem. Yeah. So those guys on
Uh,
TikTok, when they make those, short little clips of saying, go save hundreds of thousands and, get an assumable mortgage. Like, yeah, it's great in theory and it can work, but it's a
Handle it.
lot harder to do.
That's right. Yeah.
than what they make it seem like,
Hmm.
especially the ones
Yeah.
that are.
And I feel like we could use Stephen's comment for a lot of things.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That is definitely true. Um, okay. So, um, here's one thing that I think is very interesting. Around here in the North Metro Atlanta area, as locals, we see everywhere you drive around, there is a new either apartment complex being built, new townhome development, new construction neighborhood going in. And I often hear from locals, like in groups chattering, like, where are all these people coming from? And we're overbuilding and it's too many houses are here. But in reality, builders aren't overbuilding, they're just catching up because there was a huge drop off in building after the recession in 2007, 2008.
That's exactly right. And even at the current levels that we're building, we're still, I don't have the statistics right in front of me, but it's in the neighborhood of around 800,000 new families. Uh, in other words, we're short 800,000 rooftops nationwide
Yeah.
every
Yeah.
single year. And that's just compounding year over year over year. So the shortage is getting worse because we're adding so many more families than we are rooftops. So yeah, definitely no overbuilding going on. Certainly not in our area.
Yeah. So that graph that you're seeing on the screen right now, everything in blue is kind of like the level of new builds going back to the 1970s. And you see post recession 2007, 2008, we're slowly getting back up, but we still got a long way to go to those pre crash levels. And um, what was explained to me, because I wasn't in real estate at that time, is because so many builders went under during that time that they just never got back into the market um, because of legislation and lending rules that just made it so incredibly difficult to get their hands on capital. So a lot of smaller, medium-sized builders kind of went away, and so you're just left with, medium to larger builders, um, and that's also part of the reason why there's such a shortage in housing being built.
That and regulation, and I think you
Right.
you touched on it, but I don't think we can gloss over that. It is a lot more expensive for a builder to take down a lot and build a home now than it was 15 years ago, and that is something that the new administration is trying to address. From the supply side, they have said that they would like to analyze and strip away any unnecessary regulations that makes it prohibitive from an economical standpoint for a builder to take down a tract of land and put up a subdivision. So that may help a little bit.
I think another thing that needs to happen here in Georgia, and it's my understanding this happens more so on a local level, is the restrictions on. Oftentimes, you'll have cities and counties say, in order to build, you have to build a minimum square foot house of at least 1,800 square feet or larger. And so that prevents builders from coming in and building smaller home communities where you can sell at a better price point and put more houses in a certain area and, have tiny home communities. But a lot
Right.
of local legislation prevents that from actually being feasible.
Absolutely. Yeah. And other things, certain amount of road frontage that each home has to have, certain amount of lot size or lot diameters, clearances between houses. Yeah. All that can be prohibitive of buyers, really builders being able to build houses that buyers can afford.
Yeah. So here is what experts are predicting for home prices in 2025. And this is the level of appreciation that they're predicting year over year. And so the good thing is that they're all experiencing or predicting that we're going to experience positive growth. The numbers are a little bit across the board there on what they're projecting for home price appreciation, but the average of all of those is about 2.5% year over year. What is your perception of that?
I think that's incredibly geographically specific, right? And I think we saw it in that chart earlier. There are parts of the country that won't see that, if in my opinion. Certainly the Northeast, the Northwest, um, but in the more affordable parts of the country, it's going to be a lot higher than the numbers that you see here, including in the southern region that we talked about. The Midwest is booming again because it's so affordable to live in those areas. So yeah, it depends on where you want to live, I would think.
Yeah. And also from a real estate perspective, I would say that This is much more of a welcome change than the, 8, 9, 10% year-over-year home price
Oh,
appreciation
sure.
that we've experienced the past couple of years. I will say that, at least for the markets that I tend to cover, home prices year-over-year have been somewhat flat or maybe just a tiny bit elevated. And so it's brought a little bit of relief in response to the interest rates, and I don't anticipate that to hold for much longer.
Yeah, just like the economy as a whole, we need a well-balanced, healthy, sustainable growth. You don't want these bubbles or these massive growths where, a buyer is competing against a dozen other buyers to try to buy the same house. That's not a great place that we were in for a while.
Yeah, Stephen has another great question. Are construction loan requirements similar and comparable to a conventional mortgage? And I assume that construction loan rates are much higher.
Great question, Stephen. Yeah, from a guideline standpoint, very similar. I mean, we're doing the same conventional loan. We're just funding it differently. Instead of funding it all at once at closing and giving all the money to everybody that's involved, mainly the seller, now we're giving that loan in little bitty pieces, what we call draws. So we're just a little bit here, a little bit there, so that the builder can build the house out of the ground. So that when it's all done, we've given the entire loan balance out, refunded the entire loan balance. So from a qualification perspective, it looks almost identical. As far as them being much higher during the construction phase, they're higher. But the way we structure our construction loans, uh, we're going to float that interest rate down to wherever the market is at that time.
Mm,
So we don't want to penalize somebody for building their own home. We want to encourage that. So yeah, there's
right.
added risk during construction, so there's a higher rate. But if interest rates are 6% when construction gets complete, that's where that interest rate's going to go for their permanent financing, 6.5, 7, whatever it might be. We're going to float it down to the market when the time comes.
Yeah. We got a good question this week from a client that I didn't know the answer to and reached out to you, which is, can you do a construction loan using your VA benefits?
Yeah, yeah. Technically, VA allows it, right? So the VA guidelines allow for construction financing. However, the VA has some weird quirky guidelines. And one of them that they have inside a construction loan is that the veteran can't pay any of the closing expenses and they can't pay any of the interest that accrues on the loan during construction. So who does pay it?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
No other party involved in the transaction, builder, agent, lender, nobody else can come in and pay it. So it leaves you where real world rubber hits road. You're not going to be able to do a VA for construction lending. Um, So it's one of the things that I really wish they would address and let veterans be able to build their own homes with their veteran benefits.
Yeah. Um, I have gotten a ton of viewers that have reached out over the past weeks, months, asking about or wanting to build on land. And as much as I would love to provide tons of great options for people that want to do this, the realistic factor is that it's a lot harder to accomplish than what it seems like it would be.
Yeah.
And for the most part, it's having to find the land that's suitable to build on.
Hmm.
Um, Land is so expensive.
Yep.
If it's anywhere remotely close to anything that you would want to be close to, it's going to cost you a pretty penny there.
Sure.
Because if I would say fairly priced, if it was more economically priced, either a builder has already snatched it up to build a spec house on it just to sell to someone that's going to come along and build it,
Yep.
or that seller is able to sell it for a premium because yes, a lot of people would love to have a house in the woods on 2 acres and still be 15 minutes from a Target and a Publix,
Sure.
and within an hour and a half of Atlanta. But
Yeah.
that's really, really hard to find here in this area. And sometimes I feel like people say, oh, well, we have a $600,000 budget in total. We can't find what we're looking for. We'll just go build it.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, the math doesn't quite always work out to where it ends up being something that's saving money.
Yeah. Rarely is. If when a builder has built a home, whether it's brand new build or it was built 15 years ago, They took down a large tract of land. They developed and put in the sewer systems and the waters and the utilities and everything that it takes to sustain that subdivision. They did it on a big scale. Well, with big scale comes better prices. So with you just taking down one particular tract of land and having to do all that same stuff for that one tract of land is more expensive. And every stage of the process of construction, you'll have builders tell me, I've got to get a framer to come out and frame this one house, or when I'm in my subdivision, I can have them come out and frame 7 houses
Yeah.
all at the same time, right? And so that framer, a little bit of a discount when you're doing 7 of them versus driving out to do one of them.
Yeah.
So every little bit becomes slightly more expensive. So you're right. There's a perception that building your house is always going to be less expensive. That's definitely not necessarily the case.
I had an opportunity to meet with a really high-end builder in the Alpharetta area and had a chance to look at some of his really amazing houses. And these are, homes that sell for $3-4 million, really high-end finishes and in really great locations in Alpharetta. But the thing is, he was sharing a little bit more about what it cost him just to acquire the land to put that
Right.
house on. And some of his land costs are $1 million to $1.5 million for
Isn't
just
that
for one
crazy?
house.
Wow.
And then I was trying to do the math in my head. And I was like, your profit margin can't be that high. And it was kind of shocking to me that, you're spending all this money and you're selling something at such a high cost, but you're probably not making it that much on it.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the problem, right? That's why we're not in the housing bubble, because builders are not overbuilding because it's not profitable enough to overbuild.
Yeah.
Right? Like there's no incentive to really go out and take down the land to build enough homes for that we actually need.
Right. Robert's joining us from California. Thanks for joining in and watching us. Jody has a great question. Is Georgia a good place to purchase a rental property, rent now, move in a few years when family is ready to relocate to Georgia?
Ooh,
And I
I
think
love
what
them.
you're saying is maybe go ahead and purchase the house, use it as a rental for a few years until you're able to come here to Georgia. Yeah, that's a good question. And
It is.
um, all of it depends on the math and in my opinion, the capital that you have up front to put into that rental property.
Agree.
Because if you're able to put down a large down payment where the numbers make sense in terms of what you can get in rental versus what you're paying in carrying cost and interest and all that kind of good stuff, um, there can be pockets of areas where it's kind of hard to make the math work on just the minimal down payment
Sure.
in the short term.
I see the same thing. We'll see market rents at maybe $3,000 a month for market rents, but if the mortgage is $3,400 a month, that's not going to be something we want to pull the trigger on, most likely. So it all comes down to how much money do we have to invest. Um, and then there's the psychological component is are you up to being a landlord, right? Because that's, some people love it and it's great, and then some people get into that and it's not for them. So it takes the right person to be able to dive into that for sure.
Yeah. Um, but overall, rental market is still very, very strong here in Georgia. I think looking long term at real estate as an investment for rental properties is a great idea.
You
And
bet.
what I'm seeing is what I'm fearful of and what I'm seeing play out, over the past 2 years. Oh God,
No,
I got a new
hello.
camera. Oh, there's my what? What? Okay. I don't know.
Now we got your lap.
Hang on. Yeah, I know.
Now we have me. Hello. I think Sarah may have got disconnected. I'm sure she's going to join us back in just a second. But what she was talking about with rental properties is that Georgia's an incredibly, just like housing is in short demand. Well, rental properties are in high demand. I should say, not short demand, high demand. If you need to rent a single family detached home, it's going to be challenging to find a place. So yeah, if you've got the capital to invest in rental property, it's going to work out well. All right. I can't find
Okay.
Sarah. There
All
she
right.
is.
I'm back. I
I
don't
was
know why
trying to
that did
find you
that.
everywhere.
I switched cameras. So, okay. Well, I think that is our cue that we have said everything that we need to say. John, I know that you have a hard stop, so I appreciate you joining us and being here on the live stream tonight. If someone wants to get in contact with you to get your great insight on how you can help them buy a home, they can find you by reaching out to me. I'd love to put you in connection with John. You are with Capital City Home Loans. Any parting words for all the great people?
Just that I love talking about this stuff, right? I have
Yeah.
a real passion for it. So even if you're not ready to buy now, or you're just curious, you're just wanting to kind of brainstorm, that's the kind of thing we love to do. So reach out. Let's talk about it. Let's see what comes of that conversation. If not now, when? Right? Let's again, it's all about developing that game plan, and it's something we love to do. So give us a shot.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks for joining us, John.
All right, bye guys. See you later.
Bye. So thank you for joining us tonight. If you have not liked and subscribed to the channel, please go ahead and do that. It definitely helps me reach more people. And if you know someone that's thinking about making a move here to Georgia, please share my channel with them. I'd love to connect and get to know you better, especially if you're thinking about making a move. You're going to be able to find my contact information directly below this video. We publish videos every single Monday, giving you information on everything you need to know about living here, moving here, what to look out for. So if there's ever any way that I can help you, please don't hesitate to reach out. So thanks for joining me tonight. Follow me over on Instagram, and I will see you here again on Monday and on the live stream the following week. See you later.